Hello, welcome to the HRX Innovation Panel. My name is Kadir Kadhiresan. I'm a Vice President of Venture Investments with JGDC. JGDC is the corporate venture capital arm of J&J. We have a great panel participants organized here. They're going to introduce themselves. I'm going to start with Geoff. If you can introduce yourself and go down to the right. Go ahead.
Thanks, Kadir. Great to be here. Geoff Pardo, General Partner with Gilda Healthcare Partners.
Théophile Mohr Durdez, Theo, I'm the CEO and co-founder of Volta, and thanks for having me.
Yep, thanks for having us, Kadir. Maria Berkman, Managing Director of Longview Ventures and Head of MedTech at Broadview Ventures.
And I'm Rick Sanghera, co-founder and CEO of Adicor Medical.
Great. Well, thank you all for making the time to attend this panel. So we're going to start off with a kind of a key question here. We are at HRS, one of the premier electrophysiology conferences. So as you think about electrophysiology or cardiovascular in general, in terms of the innovations that are kind of happening, I would like to kind of get a probe on, what are you seeing? I mean, one of the reports from John Norris recently suggested that in 2023, cardiovascular tend to be more lower in number of investments that they see. There are other functions, other verticals getting more investments. Mm-hmm. So Maria, Broadview and Longview invest a little bit in an earlier stage.
Right.
Maybe if you can comment on, are you seeing innovation? Is there kind of a change in that?
Yeah.
Maybe if you can comment on that.
Sure, no, I'd be happy to. Actually, in advance of this panel, thought I'd just look at our data. And I looked back at our pipeline tracker and thought about and just looked at the volume of new opportunities we see every year and what proportion of those are either AFib, CRM, electrophysiology, broadly related. I think really interesting that at least since 2019, the volume of new opportunities and innovation has stayed super consistent. We see almost the same number of new opportunities every year. When I dug in a little bit more to look at the kinds of technologies we're seeing, it does feel like there's been more of a shift away from devices to monitoring, tracking, mapping, and maybe seeing just a little bit less of the kind of bread and butter ablation technologies or implantable technologies more recently. And I'd love to hear from other panelists if they're seeing the same, but I have some thoughts as to why that might be happening in AFib in particular.
Okay, all right. Maybe Geoff, I mean, Gilda is a little bit more later stage than Broadview and Longview. So have you, based on your investment criteria, has anything changed recently in terms of how you look at cardiovascular or electrophysiology investments?
Well, that's a good question. I think that actually we have gone quite early, most recently in a novel PFA catheter for treating atrial fibrillation. And that's really thought to address some of the unmet needs that still exist in pulse field ablation for AFib. So we will go early, and I think because the key inflection points in electrophysiology have often been upon regulatory approval, or at least clinical data even, we do think there's an opportunity to go in early for some of these technologies even today. But yeah, for other technologies along the monitoring front, I think we like to see a little bit more traction, and we are still seeing novel approaches to that. But I think this is one of the unique areas, at least from a Gilda perspective, where we feel like we can play both early and in a later stage, because there's a variety of points along the way which we think are big value creating points.
Okay, so we're going to come back to PFA because that is obviously a hot topic, and you see a lot of exhibits on the floor here about PFA and so on. I want to kind of get back to ARGA investment particularly. Yeah. But maybe Maria, I want to kind of go back to you here and bring Rick into the discussion, because a good portion of the audience that are watching this there are inventors, entrepreneurs, EPs working on projects in labs. And I know you were an early investor in Adicor. So maybe if you can give a little bit of a sense of what led you to kind of Adicor, and maybe kind of Rick, I'm going to come back to you later in terms of give a little bit sense of Adicor as Broadview was doing diligence on the company. So maybe Maria, if you can give a sense of that.
Yeah, no, I think, look, Broadview does a lot of early stage investing, and we often invest in first to market or first in class devices. We also, this ties into how we thought about Adicor, we also love seeing innovation in mature markets that are established and where maybe the incumbents aren't being quite as innovative, but startups, whether they're coming from incubators or university settings or just individuals who have prior startup experience, are really thinking more creatively about what's next. And I think Adacor really brought that sort of perspective to both temporary pacing and then with time to the ICD space, where there are more mature markets, there are well-established players, there are established call points, sort of commercial models in place. But when we look at the technology, the fundamentals of the technology maybe haven't changed in a long time. And so that's what attracted us to Adacor initially. And when we met in 2017, the Adacor portfolio consisted of temporary pacing. Over time, Rick and his team have expanded that to ICD as well. But at the time, at least in temp pacing, we saw an opportunity to do something completely out of the box.
Yeah.
So Rick, maybe if you can give a little bit of an overview. I don't know, the audience are all familiar with Adacor. Maybe you should give a little bit of a background of what Adacor is, and maybe give a little bit of sense of what it was like to go through the diligence of Broadview at the time of
Delightful.
investment.
It was great.
That's the right answer.
Yeah, no, thanks, Kadir. I think, Adacor Medical, what we're developing is a new kind of next generation extravascular pacing leads and defibrillation leads. And we've spent a lot of time working to get things outside of the heart, and it's kind of one of the things that we've been working on for quite some time. Certainly, as we start the fundraising process, it's always colorful. I mean, we've got interested in your thoughts as we get through this, and you try and look for partners that believe in what you're doing. You're not looking for just a bank account and a check. If you do want partners, and I think that was one of the first things when we talked in 2017. I think what I liked about Broadview is have a set process, and I think that was different, quite frankly, than a lot of the venture folks we talk with. And it's defined. The dates, the steps, and I think my first comment when we first met was, I hope we don't need your money by the time we go through this, because we're kind of trying to fundraise. But well-validated process, we get through it, and sure enough, Broadview led our Series A in 2018 and has been investing ever since.
How long did that process take?
When we first met, my view of it, I guess, we first had a call probably in June, and then that said, in the fall is when they really started to get their cohorts going and move through their process. And then from that time, we got into December and term sheets in April.
Yeah.
With a defined process there.
Okay. I want to come back to kind of the management founder kind of process here, but I want to come back to Geoff and Volta. Obviously, Gilda was an investor in Volta. So before we bring Theo into the conversation here, Geoff, maybe if you can give a sense of what did you kind of see in Volta at the stage that you are looking at them, and what drove the investment thesis for you?
Yeah, well, first let me say that we're a transatlantic fund, and actually it was my partner Janka that led the investment into Volta. So, but what I will say is that for us, paroxysmal AFib is a pretty well served. I mean, the improvements that we've seen in paroxysmal AFib over the years have been dramatic. I mean, as you recall, they used to be 4 or 5 hour procedures, low success rates, and we've seen a lot of strides in paroxysmal. But in the area of persistent AFib, where there's less than 40% success rates, 40, 50%?
50%, 40-50% depending on the landmark studies.
We saw a huge unmet need and a very unique approach using software and algorithms to really help guide ablations. And so that, to us, really captivated our imaginations and led to the diligence and ultimately the investment.
So when you made the investment, what stage was Volta at?
I was still
mega early.
Yeah.
So you have to imagine a bunch of French guys in an office about this size, and they came to us in Marseille, which is also a city like Napoli, and we have all the French accents. So 4 guys with French accent in a city like Napoli, in south of France, in an office this size, and it was a huge leap of faith. And this was also why we were really glad to have this investment, not only because of the amount of the Series A, but also in terms of we saw that they were, so to say, trusting the technology, and that we had people that were really listening to us and listening to our proposal or our value proposition for persistent AFib patients, for redo patients also, and we hope to be able to.
Maybe Theo, maybe give a little bit more sense of what
Yes.
what Volta's mapping technology is and why that is differentiated from some of the previous things that we have seen.
Absolutely. So as Geoff said, as you know, persistent AFib is the most prevalent form of AFib. That being said, it's not necessarily the most prevalent form in EP labs, and the reason for this is it's largely a non-addressed population because of the very poor results. And all the past trials, all the past industrial endeavors that trying to improve these results for patients have failed in landmark trials, as you just said. The main difference that we have with our technology is, first of all, we have a very versatile technology. We come up as an additional system to existing systems, so physicians don't have to change their go-to navigation system or their go-to mapping catheter. The second biggest difference is we rely on AI, and we are trying to have a data-driven approach with this problem. So we are trying to say what works in the clinics, and we are trying to mimic expertise that make a difference for these patients and bring it to everyone. That's the goal of the company.
That's great. And what was the process like when Gilda was doing diligence on Volta? What did it feel like? How long did it take?
So the first due diligence process took quite long because we were also a very early stage, and I think we were also a very early stage also for Gilda. Probably one of the earliest stage company that we invested in. So it took probably 4 months, which was quite a lot for such a small company. I would say with the past rounds that we have led, it took between 3 to 6 months, depending on the round. The more money you raise, I would say, the more time you need, especially in terms of taking little risk for your employees, and for the company at large.
Very good. So maybe I want to kind of get back to the issue of management diligence, founders, inventors, kind of creating companies as VCs kind of do diligence on them. The question comes in terms of, am I going to be replaced? What is it going to take in terms of the team itself? And I know Gilda and Broadview or Longview comes in different stages of the companies. So Maria, I think you are seeing a lot more of the founder related challenges sometimes.
Yeah.
So I would love to kind of see, as you looked at Atacor, how did you think of, I know Rick was at the company. Rick, you're also the founder, correct?
Yeah, one of the co-founders.
Right, yes. So it would be good to understand, and when you decide, when is it time for someone else to come and run the company, or when you let the founders to continue on?
Yeah.
Hopefully that time's not now with us.
Public announcement.
It's a great question, and I think last time, Kadir, you and I discussed this question was really in the context of an academic audience, right? Yeah. Academic founders, whether that's from university settings or clinician scientists who are actively practicing but have an idea they've patented and that they'd like to spin out. And I'll say, the more I talk about this, the more I do feel like I reference like a criteria, right? But it's been helpful to me to formulate it a little bit, and I think there's a sort of short list of things that we look for at Broadview when we look at founding scientists, founding physicians, as far as readiness to spin out, right, or readiness to commit in the CEO position. And the first thing we think about is, has this scientist or founder, have they at least seen one before? In the see one, do one, teach one mentality, have they been exposed to any other startup? Right, either as chief medical officer, advisor, chief technical officer, whatever their role may have been in at least one other iteration of being involved in a company. Because I think going from zero to running a company it's a uniquely challenging proposition. I think there's just more risk for everyone around the table. So they're sort of, have they seen one? The second thing we always ask, and we have this conversation, frankly, we didn't need to have it with you, you were already full-time, but when we're working with founding scientists or founding clinicians is, do you have a day job you want to hold on to? Because there's no such thing as a fractional CEO, inception onward, right? And we feel very strongly about that. So 100% commitment and the willingness to really set aside their, if it's clinical practice or lab or whatever the case may be. I think the third thing is the next two are you sort of learn through a little bit of trial and error and over the course of a relationship, but can the founders become dispassionate about their own baby, right? Can you sort of see past the maybe some of the emotion that's tied up with inventing something and wanting to see it flourish and make sometimes hard choices on behalf of the company, right? As a board director, as someone who's part of really a team that's making calls on where to take things next. And then to state the obvious, the fourth thing is, can they fundraise, right?
Yes.
So Rick, now hindsight being 2020, I think hit all four of those criteria, right? You had been at Cameron Health just before that, so had a lot of great experience coming out of Cameron Health. He and his two co-founders were all 100% committed to the company, so we knew we had CEO, CFO, and head of clinical operations and regulatory already in place. That was a great package. And then over the years, we're on our fifth financing together.
Right.
We've had to make some really hard choices and decisions together. And you've raised $70 million. So, that's why I invited him on the panel.
So Rick, maybe I would like to really focus on your early days of Atacor, right?
Yeah.
Even before you got Broadview to come in.
Yeah.
Because some of the audience will be looking at, well, can I keep my appointment at the EP? Can I keep doing it and be a CEO? Right?
Yeah.
Is it possible to do, to Maria's point? And so how did you deal with that, where you kind of fully in Atacor or after your Cameron days? So that would be good to understand how you got that.
Yeah, it's that risky decision at one point, right? I wanted to be kind of all in from the get-go, and co-founders did as well, and I think that's important. But that means you go through there, all right, we're not paying ourselves now, we're literally building things as cost effective, literally as you possibly can, taking leads apart in an operating room, trying to test them just for proof of concept. And I think one thing we always encourage, and as I talk to the folks as they're starting kind of companies, is small steps are great steps to take. It doesn't have to be the major milestone at the end that you think you need. When our first in man was 3 patients, and it was just literally taking other leads apart and showing a proof of concept. And we use that to get some data, and you go out to all the venture community you've talked to, like, hey, look what we've done now. And hopefully that drums up a little bit of business. We kept doing friends and family kind of as a convertible note. Did another small 3-patient cohort with a slightly, our first delivery tool, and then you go brag about that to all the venture folks you started about. Yeah. And you start to get connections that way, and I think that's really important to do, is take the small steps. And quite frankly, our introduction into Broadview was through another VC. That wrong stage, wrong timing or whatnot, but they make that introduction because they still see a belief in what it is, even if it's not right for them, they know who else. And I think that's a really important connection, and a lot of, I think, the kind of folks we have in the boardroom now have come through connections with the VCs rather than.
Right. Okay.
Could I pick up on something that Maria said? Because I think it's a really interesting point. I think she raised a great point about the ability of the entrepreneur to be dispassionate and really, and I think that's such an important point in the sense that often entrepreneurs are starting with a group of people they might have done it with before, but maybe over time are not the right people. On the flip side, the passion of the entrepreneur is really, irreplaceable, right? It's like when you hit those hard times, who's going to believe in it the most? And I think Theo can really, identify with this. Who's going to believe in it the most? And Rick, you too, is that person who started it. And so it's finding that balance between, is this person, the right person from a skill set perspective? Are they coachable? Can they surround themselves with the right people and grow over time as the business grows? Or do they really need someone who maybe now has the commercial experience? But that underlying passion, I feel like, is a big risk in that transition, because you can bring in someone who's more of like a hired gun, but doesn't have the same tie to the business. And I find that to be a tension that we fight in our businesses.
Absolutely, and I think also there is this emotional component is kind of a double-edged sword. But if you think of it, it's also very attractive for investors. At least that's my experience. I see people engaged by the emotion, engaged by the passion, both on the investor side, but also when I speak with strategic players, they know we care, and they sense it and they feel it, and this emotional component creates a bond, and this is the same story for physicians. Physicians that speak with me, they don't speak really with the CEO. They speak with a co-founder, and this makes a huge difference in terms of my ability to sell my products.
And the pitfall of that we've seen is that you can be so passionate and so convincing that we may be missing things, about like the ability to hire properly or whatever it is. It's an interesting.
I think it's a fine balance, right? And I think some of the most powerful teams out there are ones where there's a passionate founder that stays involved from inception to exit, even if their role evolves, right? Even if at the appropriate time they become chief scientific or chief technical or chief medical officer, and a professionalized team is brought in to run pivotal trial or commercial ramp or whatever the founding CEO may not, be best positioned to do. But the involvement of the founding team, the founding scientists, founding engineers all throughout, I think it is critical. I don't want to take away from that.
Yeah, and then it's the balance. I mean, you've got that passion, you're tied, it's your baby, right? And you're drinking the Kool-Aid. But yeah, I look at myself, my job is to grow the company, right? My position is just one in the company, and hopefully we grow it to the point where I'm the wrong person to run it. It's just grown, past my skill set, and that's a great day for the company. And it's hard to look at it that way versus as a founder, where it's just like, it feels like you're a little, I don't want to let go. And
definitely a refreshing view. And there are some founders who would disagree with that. I understand that. But Geoff, I want to come back to your investment in Volta. So you were talking about you had the 4 guys in Marseille, cooking up stuff in terms of mapping. So as you looked at the Volta team, where do you kind of really, trying to kind of say, well, I need to bring a seasoned medtech person into this team, right? Because it's kind of different types of concept. It's AI, mapping. It's a little bit not traditional medtech possibly. So where you kind of looking at it and saying, well, these guys need a seasoned CEO to come in and kind of take over. So how did you?
That's a fascinating question, because I think in many ways, a seasoned medtech CEO wouldn't have the creativity to look at what they're doing. I mean, they are really having to figure out, how do you monetize this sort of software in the EP lab? These are not traditional sort of medtech problems. So in fact, I think it really serves us well to have people who kind of are free from the bonds of traditional medtech. So I think that's been a real advantage to have the team that we have in place.
So Theo, I don't know, but did you have a medtech background before?
Not at all. Not at all.
So tell us a little bit more. How did you feel kind of working with a Volta partner comes in saying, this is not how we do in medtech or whatever it was? I don't know whether you said that, but but how did you deal with your development and versus kind of the traditional medtech path and the thinking? How did you kind of reconcile, I guess?
I don't really know.
Okay.
That's the true answer. Volta is my first real job, in fact. So it's kind of crazy in the medtech world. I think in the tech world, you will find it, everywhere. Like the Mark Zuckerbergs of the world, they exist.
Yeah.
In the medtech world, it's kind of the opposite. You will find gray beards, gray hair as the CEOs.
Yeah.
So I don't know how we managed to get to this point. Obviously, everyone is replaceable. At the same time, I learned a lot. I think I was kind of on a listening mode since the very beginning. I was also surrounded with a lot of experienced people. We hired very quickly also some top-level experienced executives to help me navigate the field. And also I was able to leverage on the network of physicians, of my co-founders, who are 3 physicians. And this helped a lot on understanding the value proposition, understanding how to have a market fit. And now this is a different story. So every month I had a different job, and it's still the case.
Yeah.
And I still feel like I'm learning on a daily basis.
Okay. Yeah, as we think more of, we see AI in pretty pervasive, right? In terms of all of our, in every slide deck we see AI. And, it seems like at different types of where medtech is engaging with other verticals. And that's something, this is a good lesson in terms of how do you kind of work with entrepreneurs outside of your typical medtech in kind of working in technologies that we need to go after unmet clinical needs. So.
Yeah, I 100% agree. I think that's why applying a purely medtech approach to something like a Volta would have been a mistake.
Right.
But I think the beauty of what Theo has done is he's assembled a team that can help him in each of the areas that are really critical. And I think, again, I'm more removed from it than Janka, but I think what Theo has done really well is listen, as he said. He's coachable, but he also will take a stand when they need to make a plan and move forward. And I think that, to me, is really the mark of a great CEO, is being open and willing, but is still leading, not letting their venture capitalists lead the company.
Right. So, Rick, you're smiling. Are there other interesting discussions, board discussions with your board members or investors that you had to work around or try to resolve a few key issues?
Yeah, it's of course. I mean, we're $70 million raised now, and Series A was closed in 2018. Here we are in 2024, and we started the company in 2014, so 10 years in now. And that's the nature. That's why you have a boardroom. Is you've got an idea in your mind, and I'll tell you, it's first-time CEO. There's a lot to learn, and you bounce things through the board. It's funny. Someone describes the CEO position as the loneliest position you'll ever be in, because you've got a company below, you've got a board above you, and you're kind of the filter around, right? And so yeah, we've had to make some hard decisions along the way. Sometimes you get to make some fun decisions along the way, and that's why I get a boardroom that's, I think, the people you want to work with. It goes, you surround yourself inside the company with people you want to work with. You should do that in the boardroom as well. Bad money's not worth chasing. Find good people that happen to have a checkbook that believe in what you're doing. And I think we've done a good job of doing that at the board here.
So too. Yeah, and the board, I mean, it's been through now 5 permutations. And some of those changes were modest, just adding a member or two, but there have also been some more significant changes at the board level. There are 2 strategic investors in the company. That adds a layer of sort of nuance at the board level. So it's definitely been an adventure, and we've, I think right now we can sort of, be a little more sanguine about it because Adacor just closed on their Series C financing, so company's fully funded. I think we're in a, great position, but I know Rick is always thinking about the next raise and the next sort of set of VCs and who's looking for what, right?
For this month, we decided we'll take this month.
This is a 1-month break fundraising.
Maybe I want to pivot a little bit to a kind of a different topic here in terms of, as people are working on ideas, there is a question of, well, with this idea, with this company, I'm going to be going against some well-entrenched players. There are probably 2 or 3 in EP, in CRM,
right,
or in structural heart and cardiovascular in general. There are always kind of the usual players there with their ideas. So as you think about an idea that pits you against a very entrenched player, how do you kind of think about evaluation, right? I mean, so you mentioned PFA. So each one has a PFA play. All of the major EP players have one. And you mentioned Arga as one of your recent investments. So I want to kind of maybe touch upon a little bit and say, what is that you need to see the differentiation? And maybe, Maria, if you have some examples as well, good for people to kind of hear that. So maybe, Geoff, I'll start with you.
Yeah. So I think an important thing that we think through up front is this a product that fits neatly into the portfolio of an existing player? Or is it a company that can be a standalone company? And there are obviously gray areas where they can be both. I think, oftentimes, even when there's entrenched players, we don't shy away from it because sometimes those entrenched players can be pretty sleepy. We've had a lot of instances where those entrenched players have not really innovated on the field for many, even decades since they introduced the technology. And so that can be sort of a ripe opportunity for entering a field with something that, if you think it can be really big. By the same token, there are gaps in big companies' portfolios where they need either a new PFA catheter like an Arga, or they're going to need an improvement to what they already have. And so it's really understanding kind of the product portfolios of each of the companies, but also the general landscape and whether you really can, even as a standalone, enter this with something that's very new and differentiated and sort of a market-making technology. In the case of Arga, I think this is something that we know from the outset fits into the portfolio of one of the bigger companies, and it's our knowledge of what's in those portfolios that's really, the basis for the investment.
Okay, all right. So Maria, I mean, you and I have discussed like structural heart valves,
Right.
and as you look at the opportunities in the space, what do you need to see in order to kind of be something different?
Yeah, I mean, to tie it back to the question of entrenched players and whether they impact our calculus on where to invest and where not to, two things are true. We see them as potential acquirers, right? So we do need to understand what is currently in the portfolio, where the gaps are, and what's the data set or evidence that they would need to see to make a call on a new technology. And can we fund right through that data set? But the other thing I'll say is, when we think about investing, we also realize we're probably 8 to 10 years away from an exit, if I'm going to be really honest, right? And so pretending that we can project and anticipate what the competitive landscape looks like in 8 to 10 years, we're not going to do that. So we get back to fundamentals, we get back to mechanism, we get back to, knowing everything about what's on the market today and what's in development in the startup universe. Mechanistically, does the invention we're being presented with make sense? And when I say make sense, can we see line of sight to improving what if it's structural heart, as your valves example? Does it anatomically make sense in a way that will positively impact hemodynamics and longer term potentially outcomes or quality of life? And if we can make a robust case for that at really a kind of a structural engineering, product design level, we'll take a risk and we'll place a bet there. There's one technology we've invested in that it is in the structural space, and it's going after a relatively mature structural heart segment. We took it out and showed it to a number of KOLs, practicing high volume physicians. And what was really impactful is they said, if this had been invented 10 years ago, the currently dominant product wouldn't exist. So that's super compelling, right? Sometimes innovation isn't linear. Sometimes, it's, and there's an opportunity for products to leapfrog based on superior design and superior just kind of, structural intervention. So I know that's very bread and butter and that's in the weeds, but, investing on fundamentals really has, I think, made sense for Broadview given our seed and Series A focus.
Yeah. Are you going to add something?
No, I think, I mean, from our point of view, hearing, it's always, interesting to hear the kind of the venture side of what things are developing. And, for us, it's like, I know our space, right? It's like if we're in cardiac rhythm management, just know it, know the big players, know how we fit into that. And I think that's important because otherwise it's just, gone are the days of just finding a cool product and, hey, wouldn't it be great if we could do this? Well, how does it fit into the big players' portfolios? And they might not be thinking about it yet, but that's okay. That's why we do startups, is they're probably not thinking about it yet. So it's important to play in there.
And actually, Adacor is a great example of I think a space where the competitive landscape has really evolved, right, over the last 8 years. So it's been something that's been an active conversation around the board table and thinking about how the Adacor product addresses unmet need has evolved as the landscape's evolved. So.
Quite a bit.
Okay, so maybe from investment, I want to shift to kind of management of the portfolio a bit, because as we think about venture financing in general, I think the last 2 years has been kind of down from previous years. It's still up from our big recession days from 2008-10. I think it's up, but in the last few years, since the COVID peak, it has kind of come down, and fundraising takes much longer, especially some of the growth commercialization rounds. So maybe I want to hear from Maria and Geoff in terms of what are you doing to keep your babies fed in some ways. And maybe I want to hear from Theo and Rick as well in terms of how are you extending the runways. Sure. So maybe Geoff, if I can start with you. I think you do a little bit more later rounds and commercialization rounds. So
well, I think commercializing is probably the most expensive thing you'll ever do in medtech. So we have to really think through your question frequently. And we spend a lot of time in our portfolio thinking about what's the appropriate amount of reserves that we have. We just raised the fund, but the fund prior we actually forewent making a final investment in order to preserve more dollars for our existing companies. So we try to make sure that we have plenty of capital per company. The other thing that's really hard as a venture capitalist is being disciplined. When something's not working, you know, where do you make the decision? Well, I'm going to put a little bit more over here because it is your baby at the end of the day, and that's the value of a partnership, is really being able to, you know, pull people back and say, okay, where does it make most sense from a portfolio perspective to spend our dollars? But I can tell you, you know, I'm not sure we could have predicted the M&A market and the IPO market pulling back as much as it has. Yeah. But I'm very glad that we retained the reserves that we did for different companies. And we're in a position where Volta, which I think is going to be a very successul company in our portfolio, where if we have the chance, we can deploy more money for that. And that sort of back the winner strategy, if you're disciplined enough and not sinking your money into the companies that are really struggling, that's the way to go about it.
So Geoff, maybe one follow-up. So as you think about companies that got FDA approval, now you need a $60, $80 million commercialization round for launching the product. How has Gilder kind of dealt with that? I mean, if there is no new crossover coming in, are you able to invest yourself, or you're able to find the right partner for such companies?
Oh, I think at that point, we really do need to bring in the right partners alongside of us. I mean, you know, while we have fairly sizable funds, you always need a bigger ticket, I think, alongside of you. And also people that can bring, I mean, to one of the earlier questions about bringing the right expertise at the right times, you know, we often really benefit from bringing in folks that have a lot of experience in that, say, crossover or the commercialization phase. So I think it's important to make sure that we're always finding good partnerships at each stage of the company.
Okay. How about you, Maria? What are you able to do or not do, and what are the challenges?
Yeah, no, look, I think last 18, 24 months, we all learned quickly how important the strength of your founding syndicate is. Right, on the early stage side, I think, you know, when I started in venture 12, 13 years ago, there were a lot of seed and Series A syndicates that were angel financed. Maybe there was one early stage VC, but it was a lot of friends and family, a lot of angel financings. And unfortunately, those are the companies that have a harder time in these kind of market environments, right? Where the syndicate, the original maybe angel funded syndicate, can't sustain them. So we've learned, you know, the hard way through our own portfolio over the last 2 years just how important the strength of the original VC syndicate is, because we have been in a prolonged stretch, right, of disproportionately insider financings, extensions, bridges, and even with outside term sheets and expectation that existing investors put up a significant portion of the financing, right? Often over 50%. You may have one new investor coming in, but the existing syndicate is doing more than its fair share. So I think that is, I mean, that's something we're being more intentional about as we syndicate. I think the great point earlier about, you know, not all money is green, but you kind of want to make sure it's not money that's only available today, that whoever you're partnering with will sustain those companies for the long haul. And then there's the caveat of discipline, right? Where you can't fall into the trap of, you know, in a down market, sustaining the entire portfolio. And so that's where I think for investors, the hardest choices get made of where do you reinvest.
Shut down any companies so far in your portfolio?
Not in the last couple years, no.
Anything in yours, Geoff?
Yes, unfortunately, we're going through it right now.
Okay, so you are making, other than spreading your dollars, you are being very disciplined.
Yeah, we're trying.
Yeah, okay.
But I think I totally agree with what Maria said, an interesting question for Theo and Rick is that founding syndicate's super important, and then as you bring on new investors, how do you maintain the alignment amongst your different your different series of investors?
Yeah.
Has that been a challenge?
For us, more and more. We have raised 90 million, and Gilder has helped us to bring 2 additional very strong VCs. Now they have invested at a later stage. So I think sometimes you can feel slight misalignments in terms of strategies, in terms of notably financing strategies. But I think if there is collaboration and if there is transparency, which has been the case at least around the table for us, you manage to find reasonable compromises, and we have just been able to raise an additional B3 round, which is a testament to the fact that we have really a strong collaborative board around the table.
Yeah.
And I think if you're doing the right job during your fundraising process, that strategy shouldn't be a surprise, right? When you close money, the first board meeting shouldn't be like, hey, what are we doing here? And I think we've had good luck. You know, when we went from our A to our B round, we had a strategic actually leading that round, which, you know, and as we brought in new venture partners at that point as well, you know, again, that became helping to drive our strategy, and everyone was really well aligned there. And, you know, as we've now just closed our Series C, again, the plan we were fundraising on was to meet the milestones that, you know, we done. Our first board meeting thereafter wasn't really a strategic challenge. It's the later ones that are, you know, how do we, you know, you were asking earlier about, you know, when, you know, how do you stretch funds and get creative there? And I think, you know, for us, it's always been an important aspect for the company that we've got a lot of the technical, you know, expertise inside, but we didn't build the manufacturing capabilities ourselves. We've decided to use outside partners for that. And the partners, you know, we keep a close relationship with those partners, make sure when money's good, you know, you're paying on time, you're doing all the things that you need to be doing, and as you get to the tail end of rounds, you know, you're working with them to say, hey, listen, this is great, but what if we do this on the you know, the payment side to stretch things out a little bit? And they tend to work with you because they know as soon as you're back in, you know, closing a round, you're partnered up and lined up again.
So it's interesting. So Rick, so between like A and B or B and C, as you kind of trying to raise the next round, in addition to what you just described, is anything else, I mean, you did to extend runway, right? I mean, I know maybe your insiders bridged a little bit, but anything else, I mean, because you're also trying to run the team, keep the morale up, and also kind of do the other things. So what were anything specific that you can point to that felt like it was always a nice go-to strategy?
Yeah, gosh, you know, it's, you know, your job is to make sure, again, to survive the business. And so the last thing you want to be thinking about is the head count, right? But it's, hey, it's always there at the back of your mind. But, you know, luckily we've been in good positions where we've never had to, you know, move on that path. And so, yeah, it is stretching where, all right, we're going to have to pause, and it might get a little boring for the next 2 or 3 months. And, you know, engineers are great. They just want to go, go, go. And it's kind of reining things back a little bit and saying, hey, listen, we do need to manage the spend. Here's the big picture of why. And we've been lucky enough with a good team to be able to do that and make better decisions about, you know, hey, your office space, you might need to move. Like, let's push that off a year. You know, it's the big ticket items that tend to do it. In my experience, it's less the small ticket things, you know, while they do add up, they tend, you know, it's never the $20,000 and $30,000 expenses that are shifting you in and out of money. It's the large ticket things. And our development partners have really been a help there. And that's allowed us to turn knobs considerably at the end of a round and pause for 2 and 3 and 4 months when needed and pick up again.
But I think one thing that Rick and his team have done nicely is being able to sort of modulate activity where you have a team that can really cross-cover and wear a lot of different hats. So when it's time to pull back on spend a bit and maybe you're not doing hardcore expensive manufacturing for a while, you have a team that can do, you know, more cost-effective, still, you know, value-creating activities, but, you know, documentation and paperwork is a lot less expensive than spending big dollars on your development partners. So I think that having that sort of the team that can cross-cover and be fluid and play a lot of different roles has really...
So Theo, how about you for Volta? I know it's a little bit different. It's not a lot of hardware, a lot more software for sure, but different type of product development. Do you had to make any calls? I don't know how your funding in between series went, but any tough calls you had to make?
For now, we didn't have really extremely tough calls to make, but what I would say is I think it boils down to prioritizing, and prioritizing also means defining proper objectives, agreeing on top-level objectives for the company at the board level, breaking these objectives down to operational objectives for the team. This is my job. And once we agree on the objectives, it's much easier during a budget exercise to cut things up or to increase some, you know, envelopes. And in the end, you have to think about, okay, is it logical that I invest 40% of my budget in R&D and 10% in marketing? Or at the stage where I am at now, should I, you know, change this? Should I change this? So Similarly to prioritizing portfolio companies, I think we have to prioritize our projects, and this is a collective decision at the board level.
I think the other thing Theo's done really well is one, and not to single out Gilda in this, but just in his investment partners as a whole, he's chosen investment partners that have significant amounts of reserve to backstop the company if there ever was a delay in the fundraising.
Yeah.
And the other thing he's done really well is he's taken money when he hasn't necessarily totally needed it. And that's another thing I would really advise with entrepreneurs is don't be like overly sensitive to dilution. If the capital is available, like seriously consider it. And it doesn't mean you need to take it, but like we see now, where there's a real dearth of exits, you may need to take the company further than you thought. And having that backstop of investors, to Maria's point around the founding syndicate, to maybe taking money in a creative deal when you don't really need it is important.
Right. No, that's a very important point. I can think of at least a few companies in portfolio that would have, in the heydays where, they said, well, I'm going to increase the valuation and then I'm going to exactly take that money, and then at the inflection point was been
hard to predict, right? Yeah.
Maybe in the last 10 minutes or so we have, I want to kind of focus towards in terms of, giving a little bit career advice, counseling to prospective audience that would be listening to this and saying, well, is this for me? Meaning I'm working on something, I want to create a company, I want to be a CEO, I want to kind of establish this. A little bit of what to expect. I mean, so how do you kind of opt in or opt out on this process? So I would love to kind of, maybe Rick, starting with you, kind of a little bit of give sense of, how did you, at some point, is the right thing for them to do, or maybe kind of, or maybe kind of have someone else come and run with their idea?
Yeah, it's a great question. As when I think back now, 10 years after, co-founding Adicor, you always have that, boy, is this the path I thought it would be on? And the answer is absolutely not, right? It's hey, we're going to raise $15 or $20 million and we'll have, FDA approval in 2 or 3 years. And, here we are, 70 raised, and now multiple product lines under development. It's totally different. And that's great. That's just kind of the natural progression of a business. But I think when you start it, it's going to take longer than you think it will. Fundraising is, getting hearts to beat, betting patients' lives on a device, keeping them alive. Fine, we do that well. Raising money is the most nebulous thing I'll ever do in my career, right? There's no set process to it. And I think you just have to accept that, and that's, I think, the hardest thing at first was, as engineers, we just think about the development process, and the fundraising process doesn't follow that. And so you've just got to accept that variability, the uncomfortable kind of nature of that, and know it's going to take longer. And so if you need to be all in, just make sure you've got the ability to be all in for much longer than you think it will be, and get comfortable with the uncomfortable nature of that, and that's fine.
So Theo, I mean, you said this was one of your first jobs, correct?
Yeah, correct.
So that's even more interesting, right, in terms of coming into this in running a company. So I'm sure there are people like you, right, in terms of either they're finishing med school or finishing EP residency and wanting to kind of come and do this as their first job. What would you kind of tell them?
So first of all, I agree with Rick, and my advice would be, and I was very lucky to found this company with 3 physicians, who in the end, think like users, think like customers. So my advice would be spend as much time as possible with users / customers, depending on your stage, and listen to the voice of customer. And really, you have to. It has to be like part of your inner thoughts. Like you have to think like your user. You have to think like your end user. I think that would be my main advice. Listen to the voice of customer, and this will help also you be more credible. For all stakeholders, strategic players, VCs, anyone,
What was your moral support? At any point you say, well, I'm done with this, I'm quitting. Did you come to that point at any point?
Not really, no, not really. We had some difficult moments, very difficult moments,
right.
Even tough moments, but the fact to have this founding team, and we have a great atmosphere in the company, so HR is really key. I mean, you are the sum of your surrounding team, and I think having a good team and having a good spirit, and good vibes within the company is important. My other advice would be, this is a marathon. I think this is especially true for medtech. So having a good work-life balance is essential, not only for you, but also for your team, for your collaborators. You need to lead by example, and this also needs to be true for work-life balance. For me, I spend my weekends with my family, somewhere, and I usually try to not work on the weekends, which is I usually fail, but still I try.
Good call out. Maybe Rick, I want to come back to that question. So did you, at any point, what was your moral go-to in saying this is worth doing? I mean, because during this fundraising, I'm sure it was not easy.
Yeah, I think it was the first round. You're in that as everyone's called it, the valley of death, and you think, boy, there's something to this. You've been in the space for a long time. You feel like you know the area. How come no one else sees this, and why won't they help fund it? And that came back to the small steps. It's like, gosh, we did this with $400,000, right? Look what we did. And you try and brag about that. And it took us 4 years and 3.5 years to get through that process. And yeah, there's lots of times you think about, gosh, what did I just do? I just quit a really decent job and I like my career and but I think that's the part that tests you. And if you really believe in the concept and you know the sound and you know the space that it fits into, you just got to keep moving through it and find, a partner that believes in it as well. And
so did you have a sounding board, a board member, or who are you kind of trying to have that,
I think having a great independent board member works well, right? You need somebody that's I love my venture partners, I love my independent partners, right? And then quite frankly, we're based in Orange County, California, and there's other med device CEOs around there, and we get together for lunch once a month, and great sounding boards, right? You just need somebody to kind of vent them back, and it works really well for all of us, and there's some big companies, small companies in there, you need to be able to chat through things and talk through options and learn. Right? I don't have all the answers. I want to learn.
It's a good call out. The peer network is amazing to kind of have that, especially among the CEOs. I'm sure, Theo, you have your network within either Europe or in the US to kind of lean on to say, what would you do?
Absolutely, absolutely.
Maybe come back to Maria and Geoff here. So as we again think of, you're talking to your aspiring founders, CEO of companies, they're coming to you and say, should they be doing this? Maria, what would you say? And maybe I'll come back to you, Geoff.
Yeah, that's it. I mean, there isn't a lot I can add. I think Rick and Theo summarized it really well. I think, I say this to people who are just starting out in venture. This is an amorphous job, right? We make things up as we go along, and the investment landscape changes, the competitive landscape changes, technologies change. I mean, those of us who are medtech VCs we're having to learn about tech and digital, and we're becoming tech VCs, whether we like it or not. So it's definitely on the venture side, kind of a job without a playbook. And I think that's tenfold on the startup side, right? I mean, for anyone considering whether it's the venture side of this ecosystem or the startup side, I think you really have to be comfortable with and almost embrace the uncertainty and the fact that you're going to have to build things from scratch. And yes, you'll meet CEOs, you'll meet other VCs, and you'll get advice, but no one's going to tell you how to run your company, right? And if that excites you, maybe it's a great fit, right? If that's something you sort of shrink from, it can be really tough, at least in those initial stages, right, of getting your first company off the ground, getting your first deal done.
Geoff?
Yeah, I mean, I would say I always try to meet, particularly local entrepreneurs, I always want to meet with them, and, I feel I grew up in this area, so I love seeing it, thrive, and I think one of the things we see sometimes in the Boston area is people who have cool technologies, but they haven't really thought about the market. And so I think really putting some thought into what the market is it an attractive market both from a financial perspective, but also from a an exit perspective. You know, try to meet with people who are funding these types of businesses and get their perspective as well. So kind of building off of what Theo said and meeting with the users, that's absolutely critical. But then meet with folks like me and Maria who will probably see a lot of different technologies and can tell you, and meet with lots of people, because every venture capitalist opinion is just an opinion, but meet with lots of folks to get a sense of what they're seeing in the overall marketplace, and how compelling this will be. And I think if you meet with enough of those people as well, you'll develop kind of, okay, here are the things I need to watch out for. Maybe this isn't an opportunity, because once you decide on that opportunity, as everybody around the table knows, you're with it. Like, you're committed. You're not getting out of it. So that project selection is so important.
So when an inventor has come to Gilda and say, well, here's my project, and you say, well, and have you done this research? Now, what resources do you bring to bear to them to kind of further solidify their numbers or market? Because some of them don't have any business savvy or business exposure. They are really clinicians or engineers who come to this. So how do you kind of provide that?
Well, yeah, it can be a variety of things, and I mean, I often don't have the answer or the specific numbers, but where we've lived a certain sector or experience, we can often bring some primary data to bear. But I think venture capitalists can be most useful because of who's in their network and who's in their ecosystem, and it's pointing that entrepreneur to the right person who may be an expert in that particular thing from a market perspective or commercial perspective.
Right.
So,
excellent. I think this has been a great discussion. I want to thank each one of you individually for the time. Rick, Maria, Theo, Geoff, thank you.
Thank you, Kadir.
Thank you.